Hey everybody, welcome back to the Lookout. Today's the 9th of August and it's time to take a look at California forest fires. We're just covering two main fires right now. We're covering the Park Fire in Tehama and Butte counties, and we're covering the Crozier Fire down in Dorado County. And if you're just joining us for the first time, this is the Lookout. This is a production of Lookout Media in Chico, California, and we present fire intel, talk about forestry, talk about land management, and we talk about how large fires are managed and fought. And our mission is to increase wildfire literacy of Californians and help people understand why we have big wildfires, what happens when they escape initial attack, and how we fight them, and give you hopefully some context on this complicated topic. My background is in mapping, and I've been working in fire-related mapping since 1998. So I use the tools from my trade to produce these videos, and also we run the lookout.org website. So welcome. I'd like to thank our sponsor, QTAC. QTAC makes fire equipment here in Chico, California. Great company. I use their equipment on prescribed burns. Company I work for, they build a lot of our equipment. So check out their website. You can find a link to QTAC on the Lookout, and recommend their stuff. And we're glad that they're Lookout fans and they want to support our mission. So thank you, QTAC, for helping make this happen. TJ wants to look at the new Canyon Fire. Looks to me like, from what I can tell, the Canyon Fire's out. So we're going to talk about Crozier real quick. All right. Quinn Felix. Welcome, everyone. All right. So we're going to start off just looking at Crozier Fire. Didn't hear a lot about this fire today, but looking at the webcams of it versus yesterday, it looks like it's not doing a lot. And we'll have I'll look at the maps in a minute here, but not much smoke going on the webcams right now. It looked, we were looking at it last night, and it looked like they'd made a ton of progress. And so on the mapping I've got, this fire looks like it's really not doing a lot today. We talked about yesterday how if you see a lot of white smoke, usually it means it's like fine fuels, and if you see lots of dark smoke, it means it's heavy fuels. This little flickering mushroom cloud in here is nothing in particular. It's just an old image. Oh man. I gotta take a call. This guy calling, talk to me real quick about the fire in yeah, just hang on a second. It's a guy that's out on the Park Fire on the fire line today, and I just wanted to get a little bit of intel from him, and so I'm just gonna have him text me. All right. Yeah, sorry about that, but that stuff's valuable to me. Okay. Someone wants to check out the Boise Fire south of Orleans. Okay, we'll check out new fires as soon as I get through all this stuff. So just to finish up Crozier, this is not what it looks like. This is what it looks like right now. It's still kind of across a broad front. They had helicopters working on it all day, and right now the fire itself looks kind of disorganized. That's what we'd say. So Crozier. All right, so this This green outline here is what we had as of kind of midday today. And if we look at where it was yesterday afternoon, well, this is where it was yesterday morning. And so what we like seeing here is that this fire hasn't spread at all in the last like 30 hours on this whole flank where it started. And we had some other mapping. So it's moved out to this line here that is the fire line from King Fire and hasn't crossed it. And then here it hasn't moved for over 24 hours. So the main growth on it since yesterday is kind of up towards the ridge here where there's a really good control line, and out here, and I don't know what the strategy is there. But from what I could see today on the webcams, this fire's looking really good, and there's probably other, I don't know who else has got other intel for you, but I can't say much more about it other than the webcams look really mellow today. And just one thing that's interesting about when you hear containment is they're not going to call any of this contained for a while because they need to go out there and make sure that there's no like burning logs that can roll downhill and everything else. But when you see a fire that doesn't move for 24 hours along a flank, that's a good sign. And so you could say, like, I think it'd be nice if there was a term besides containment, because containment is really conservative. But if you could just say, like, hey, this fire, 65% of it hasn't moved in 24 hours, depending on the fuel type, that can be significant. That could tell you something about how things are going. Because right now, if you look at the reports and they say, oh, it's only 5% contained, you get this impression that, like, this thing's spreading in all directions and only 5% of it's not moving. But in reality, like, they might be saying it's 5 to 10% contained, but in reality, like 60% plus of it hasn't moved for 24 hours. So we need, the lingo's limited and the official numbers that you get often are limited. I've been on fires where they say it's 30% contained and you get there and the fire's out. You can't even see a smoke. But they haven't had time to go around and mop it up and patrol it and everything else. So there's purposes for the definition, but it's good to remember that the difference between wildly spreading, contained, and controlled is all kind of different. Anyway, Crozier, it's looking pretty good all in all, I'd say. I would expect that it's up here and tied in. By now I don't know how old this mapping is. So that leaves kind of this flank here on the north side that would be open. But I can't talk much more about that, just not having great fresh intel. But this is what we had, and we look at the webcams. All right, so to park. Park. And I'm hoping that guy texts me, who was trying to call me because he knows better than I do what's going on up here. All I've got that's new on the infrared from today is the green line is kind of the latest place that CAL FIRE flew it today. And there's something going on funky with their stuff. Okay, this is 4 p.m. So just to orient you on the park fire, everything kind of below, like the whole front country is no longer really in play. And we've been really focused on the area kind of between Paynes Creek and Mill Creek, and then up the Deer Creek kind of rim and up to Mineral. So all this black line mess is all the Dozer lines. And down here is where the fire really kind of exploded out of here on the 5th. And it blasted up, and they'd been holding this edge of the fire as the fire kind of moved up the canyon. This squiggly line is something we looked at, which was a fuel break that was put in and maintained by Sierra Pacific Industries to protect all their stuff up here. And it didn't work out so well in this fire because the fire kind of came at it on both sides already. But anyway, fuel breaks, a lot of what determines whether or not a fuel break works or doesn't work is luck and where the fire starts and what the conditions are. Okay, so anyway, the fire, when it made its big run up Mill Creek Canyon here, which just kind of completely nuked that landscape per this imagery. All the brown in here is high severity fire where almost all the trees died. So, and this imagery is from the 6th, so 3 days old. So since then, the initial run kind of blasted through this corner of the private timberland, And then since then, the fire is they've had a ton of aircraft, helicopters and stuff trying to contain this western flank of the fire. And they've done all right with that, but they've had it squirt out on them several times. And so as of yesterday or early this morning, the fire had kind of squirted out here and crossed the Turner Mountain Loop road. Or there's a bunch of Turner Mountain roads, and I'm not sure exactly which one that is, but it had crossed that. And then what you can see now is the fire. This green line is kind of where the fire is now today. So today the fire was active on this flank of Turner Mountain. This heat here is from the 6th. So the fires continue to flank out here to the west. And we looked at a profile of this the other day. This is, it's not unsteep. And Turner Mountain is now this puzzle for them to try to figure out how to tie it in, right? So pretty sure that, right, so the red line here is where the fire was this morning at about 2 a.m. and the green line is where it was today at 4 p.m. So Turner Mountain, the south side of Turner Mountain, has continued to be in play and likely will continue to be. And there was a strategy today to take direct line along the fire from up here by drop point 48, basically to go direct on this line of fire down to this road. And there's some discrepancy between what the infrared flew last night in red and then what CAL FIRE mapped earlier. But basically what it looks like is from 4 p.m. and from last night at midnight till 4 p.m., this line here was holding. And so that's direct line that's being put in by hand crews in some really rugged country. And so you can see up here above 48, this is growth outside of that. So this, up on Turner Mountain, the fire did spread in this big brush field between 2 a.m. and so 16 hours or so between 2 a.m. and 4 p.m. The fire was spreading here, it was spreading here, and it was spreading here. So there's this big bowl on Turner Mountain. But from this divide down, it looks like the hand line held today. So just to give you a scale, a sense of scale, it's this is some pretty steep ground here. And to give you a sense of location, here's Mineral over here. So if you're looking straight south from Mineral, across Battle Creek Meadows, there's a big bowl over there, and the direct line that they're fighting right now is hooking around the bottom of where the fire is active there. So with the weather changes coming, we're supposed to have some winds, some potential for some big wind, some big southwest winds. It's a unique spot in that it's tucked in. If we look at where southwest winds would come from, down Battle Creek, basically. This fire line's tucked in into this valley, so might be a little sheltered, might help. With southwest winds, they're beneficial. They're favorable for not blowing your torching trees over your line. So, we don't really know how likely. The longer they go through improving this line and holding it and not having embers across it, etc. Obviously, the better, because once you get past there, they don't have a lot of great options terrain-wise to halt the westward spread of the fire here above Mineral. But today, one thing I was looking at today on the webcams is that it really stayed smoked in for the most part in Mineral today. So you got two pieces of the puzzle there. If they do tie in, so here we're looking west with Mineral over here. If they do tie in from this Turner Mountain Loop Road up to the ridge here, they still have to figure out what's going to happen out here on this next stretch. And one of the things about fighting fire direct is you kind of have to have a stable anchor point to start at. And anchor point, right? So if you're cutting line along this edge of the fire, you don't want it to be able to squirt out kind of behind you and burn up behind you. So as long as this fire is kind of active and they don't have necessarily a decent anchor point, if you started fighting fire here on the road with the fire below you, this can come and hook around and trap you up here. So it's a challenging, there's this land, the federal land here, you can see where the private land ends basically, because that's where all the clear cuts stop. And so once you get onto this federal land, there hasn't really been a lot of management there for a long time. And so there's heavy deadened down and thick forest, and it's a challenging spot. So that's why, of the entire 427,000 acres, that's why, or more, that's why this part's still open, right? It's difficult ground. We'll see that. We'll see what happens there. Elsewhere on park, Highway 36 has been holding. So here's mineral to Child's Meadows. They fired 36 a few days ago, and it's held. And then they kind of brought it around and up 172, and then it kind of slopped over on 172. And so they fired out here on Doe Mountain. And Doe Mountain here had a fire called the Stump Fire. I'm curious if I've got that in my thing. Don't know. Got 2022 fires. Anyway, this whole area burned. An interesting thing on this fire is they sprinkled fire around the top of this so the fire would back down and kind of not be too intense. And it's a little hard to interpret here, but you can see that the fire, they lit these little red spots, and now it's back down the hill. So the good news for that is that likely all the trees that survive stump, most of them will survive this fire. Other than that, no new spread on this whole corner, down around Child's Meadows, Highlands, and then all the way back down Deer Creek. Huge area that got fired. It's kind of burning in on itself here, but there's really been no growth on Deer Creek. So pretty good news for all of Deer Creek. Like, the fire got in below the K line and it hasn't moved for over a week down here in Deer Creek, and Deer Creek kind of dodged a bullet. Unlike Mill Creek that got freaking cooked. Okay, so some people have some questions about some other fires that are going on. We'll talk about those real quick, and then we're going to come back and talk about Dozer line. Let's leave this on because maybe they flew the... So someone's asking about a fire up by Orleans. So we're going to turn on our heat satellites here. There you go. All right, so orientation. Oh, someone wants. I just saw. There's a fire by Lakeview. Let's deal with northwestern California first. If you're interested in learning about fire management in the Klamath Mountains, I recommend checking out a video that we did with Will Harling. Will Harling is quite the dude. He's a good friend of mine. He's got serious cancer right now. He's my age. He's 50. He's got a really rare form of cancer, and he lives in Orleans, and he's really spearheaded a lot of the prescribed fire and kind of big conversations in the Klamath about fire. And so I highly recommend checking out this Will Harling video. He and I are we're both mountain kids. We both kind of grew up children of back to the landers. Me in Lassen County, Will in the Klamath Mountains. And we both got passionate about forests and fire, and have kind of dedicated our lives to working on this stuff. And so this conversation with Will, it's really, we talk about kind of landscape scale opportunities for burning, We talk about the behavior of some of the big historic fires in the Klamath Mountains. Look at community-led efforts over there. He really has a sense of history, and he's kind of tied in with a lot of the indigenous folks over there, and there's really a lot of great stuff happening in the Klamath around fire, and like broadening the conversation around fire to not just be about suppression, but to be about community resilience. And so Will's great, and if you like the video and you kind of resonate with Will's message, I would recommend checking out his GoFundMe, because he's fighting for his life right now, and amazing dude. So Orleans is where Will lives, and there's a fire, and it's got a few dots, so pretty tough spot for access and everything else. The Klamath is steeper than a cow's face. It's built for goats and Bigfoot, and not so much for firefighters, especially firefighters from Texas or Kansas. Anyway, let's look at something here. Let's look at our fire history. There's a good story to tell about fire up here. If you look at our coverage from last year, there was a lot of fires up here, and they got creative and did some really different kinds of things than what you would see in just about anywhere else in the world. 2023 lightning bust. Here we go. All right, so over here, 2023, lightning came through the Six Rivers last year, started this fire here, the Perch Fire. Started fires all over in kind of what's called the Go Road, and so this was like 9:15, right? And so I have way too much data on these fires, but basically what happened by the time it was over was there was a ton of firing done and a lot of beneficial fire. So they took the opportunity of having all this fire on the ground, and they lit like crazy off the ridges with helicopters, and they maximized really the ecological benefits of these fires. And another big thing that happened was on these fires was they really worked closely with the Kadu tribe, asking them what they wanted and how they would handle things. And they had Native people out there helping figure out how to light it. And the Native people were saying like, hey, we want you to take the fire slowly down this ridge because there's important big, heritage hardwood trees that are important for lots of reasons for us. So one takeaway though from that is, okay, this Perch Fire here, this fire is now, even if it grows out to this whole basin, it's not going to burn here because this all burned last year. All right, so I need to find some perimeters because this story up here is really, really interesting. I got way too much data, that's the problem. There we go. All right, yeah, so this story is kind of an aside, but since we're talking about fires burning in the Klamath, if you look at, got kind of a progression here of how these fires unfolded. These fires got started with lightning. They didn't have enough resources initially. Like when you look at everywhere there was lightning in last year, this time of year, there was fires all over the map, like all over northwestern California up into Oregon. And so initially these fires were low priority because they didn't have resources to attack them all. And so they kind of let some of these burn. Early on, they burned off a couple road systems. But they kind of naturally spread. And one of the concerns that people had here in Orleans at the beginning of this whole event was that we talk a lot about how previous fire scars fragment the landscape and minimize the potential for a mega fire. And so we had the Dixie Fire, grew 1 million acres, because you had this huge contiguous area that hadn't burned for a long time. So when you look at this area here where these fires were burning last year, this is like 50,000 acres that hadn't had a fire since like that's a 1918, 1917. So there was concern in Orleans that there would be big fire here eventually that happened under adverse weather, and it could threaten the town of Orleans, which is a little town where most of the people on the river live in these little teeny towns. So once these fires got started, we like we had this year, like there's these windows of weather that are beneficial for firing operations. And so what was happening during this, as these fires unfolded, was they weren't really spreading very fast, and they were mainly on the upper slopes where they couldn't really run downhill very fast. So the team that took over the fire decided that they would join them all up through ridgetop firing, and they wrote a firing plan. They started monitoring the smoke. They didn't want to like smoke out the Bay Area. They didn't want to smoke people on the river out too badly, and so they kind of they came up with this plan. And then over the course of this is a month into the fire, they were using like helicopters with ping pong ball machines to light the ridges. And so by the time they were done, they'd connected all these fires together. A lot of the fires just kind of went out on their own because it was October, and we have big prescribed fire trainings in Klamath in October because it's a perfect time of year to get good ecological effects. So basically the fire started in mid-August, and they managed them for 2 months. And when you're done with all this, we got kind of these ecological effects that were like a lot of it, you couldn't even really tell that there'd been a fire out there. Like there were some patches where the wind blew hard and like the fire was burning in a brush field or something. But a lot of the fire when it was done was this patchy, what we would call even like a mosaic, which is like totally what we would aim for with prescribed burning. So basically, what they did is they took advantage of the resources they could get through the wildfire, the hotshot crews, the drones, everything else. And they got like 30,000 acres of mainly beneficial fire into this landscape, fragmenting it. So now Orleans is not as exposed to like a big fire coming out of this country, burning down into there. So interesting, a lot of lessons learned there. It was a Rocky Mountain team that really kind of took the lead on developing this, but they worked super closely with the tribe. And the forest supervisor, or at least the district ranger over there, was a native guy, and they were listening. They were listening to the tribe. And so one thing that was a takeaway from this, for me, was there's a long history of strained relations in this country. And like speaking of Will Harling, I was on the fire here in 2008 in Orleans. And I knew Will, but not well. And someone on the team was complaining, like, goddamn Will Harling, like, and Bill Tripp, those guys, like, they're coming in here, they're telling us how to do our job. And it was like the team was from like Southern California or something. Think they know this area better than we do. And it's like, well, Bill Tripp's people have lived there for since the beginning of time, and Will Harling's been around all these fires since he was a little child. So it's, yeah, of course these guys know better than you do. Like, they basically, Will and Bill were saying, like, hey, we don't think you should put a ridge line. We don't think you should put a fuel break down this ridge during this fire because they tried that in 77 and it blew out. And they tried it in 87 and it blew out. And they tried it in 2004 and it blew out. And so basically Will and Bill were there as resource advisors, and they got demobbed. Like, the IC fired them because he didn't want to listen to him. So following some of these fires, these big fires we had in 2008, there was a lot of criticism of the firing practices of the command teams. Because as we've talked about, firing is what stops these big fires. And at times, teams in the past have like lit off the road at the bottom of the hill. And there's even been kind of cases where people thought that was being done on purpose to kill more trees so they could log more to make more money off timber. So there's this long history of kind of suspicion and disgruntlement on the local part about firing operations. And then we see the same thing in Dixie. Big firing operations during Dixie under extreme conditions caused a lot of the fire spread. And so one thing that's different in the Klamath versus, say, Quincy is that the locals have been kind of more directly involved in pushing for tactical decisions for a long time. And a lot of that came into the head and during 2008. And the forest supervisor really started listening to what the locals had to say. And they kind of developed this program on the Salmon River that's the community liaison program. So a lot of fire savvy people who work on, like Will and Karuna Greenberg and other folks that are prescribed fire community leaders over there, they started this kind of community liaison official position. So that person goes and they meet with the team, the incident command team, and they sit in on the planning, and they provide input on what the locals know to be true. And it's really kind of this last year's events with the native people helping lead the burning and with the locals having a seat at the table in tactical decision making. That is the result of like 15 years of friction or more, but like a process that started in 2008 of locals really getting plugged in and going to the forest supervisor and saying like, hey, we want to know why you're doing these firing operations where you are. So when we started going on fires in like 2013, 2014 in the Klamath, every time that they did a firing operation, we were putting it on a map, and they were creating maps specifically about firing operations so they could track it, because the forest supervisor wanted to know exactly where the team was putting fire on the ground. So there's a lot to learn about fire management and how a community can become really involved in the official process, because oftentimes the public just gets shut out. And this community is a great example, but there's communities like where I grew up, Westwood, Chester, Greenville, where locals, there's a ton of retired fire people that know the history. Locals know the history. And so that's one of the reasons we want to have this channel and improve people's fire literacy, is because we want you and your community to have an opinion, an educated opinion about how things are going to get done. And obviously when Cohasset's burning down, no one's going to be out there telling the dozers where to push. The dozers are going to go initial attack. But if you're in a place where you have a fire like we do in Klamath that's going to burn for 2 months, there's time there in the operational tempo for some deliberation. And that's the future, I think. There's always going to be initial attack and the fire that lasts 72 hours, the Crozier Fire, the first week of the park fire, where it's not the time for the public to come to the planning meeting and say, like, I don't want you to backburn this ridge. But like where we are right now on park, as we go into this kind of grind, if there's stuff like that we can pre-plan, if the locals know that, hey, this particular ridge on Turner Mountain has got good access, etc. A lot of that stuff we can preload, and then when the team comes in, you can say like, hey, here's a binder, or here's, talk to this person about how to get back into this place. So they've done it well here, and there's a lot of great videos about the Klamath. Check out the work of Stormy Stotts and the Kaduk tribe. So let's see. There's a lot. If you just Google like Kaduk, Karuk, wildfire management, Klamath wildfire management, but they're doing a really good job of telling the stories. We'll put some stuff from this on the lookout. Wildfire 371 saying perhaps a contingent of local burners could be mobilized and work for ops on strategic and tactical RX in conjunction with suppression. I like that idea. You know, I think we're getting there in a lot of ways with, like, there's people who got trained up by the Butte PBA who were out helping with suppression during the park fire initial phases. You know, so building that community literacy, you know, having young people who, as part of their college degree, learn how to run a Type 6 engine, run a pump, deploy a fire shelter. Anyway, this place is, there's just a million stories you can tell about the Klamath. Last year during these fires, there was like a no-fly zone over here because some locals did a prescribed burn in their yard at night because that's what they've been burning for thousands of years. And the firefighters came to put it out, and some aunties, I think some elders with shotguns told them, go away. We're fine. We don't need your help. And so on the maps it said, restricted areas, keep out. And they kind of handled it. It didn't become like a SWAT team Ruby Ridge thing. They just said, all right, we're going to leave the aunties alone. Looks like they got that handled. So that's like not uncommon. Like this is a different planet. So long story short, I don't know what's going to happen with this fire, but whatever happens, it's going to be interesting because people around here have strong opinions about fire's place in the landscape, and a good place to learn about all that stuff too is the Salmon River. I'm going to put it in the Orleans Complexities Facebook. And that got started during some of these complexes, and they're clever over there. So the complexities thing is a play on wildfire complex. But if you're a student of fire, you should keep track of what's happening in the Klamath. And the Klamath has a Trex event every fall, Prescribed Fire Training Exchange, and you can go over there and stay in Orleans and burn for 2 weeks. So Google the Klamath River Trex if you're interested in that. And you don't necessarily have to have a lot of fire experience for them to accept you. All right, wish I knew more about that. Let me look at my Intel page here real quick and see if they got anything about it. "15 acres, 4 engines, no cameras, nothing on the cameras. 40 acres, single tree torching with spotting, helicopters working on it." Someone says you should order some smoke jumpers. This guy, I love it. He's like, seems like you should order some smoke jumpers. His handle is SMKJ79. He says, I am biased though. Oh, all right. These guys have good stuff going on too. They're talking in here about Facebook, social media. All right. Yep, this is a good site too. I'll give you the link. Someone wants to know about a masterclass on different types of fire lines, Dozer line. That's a great segue. So, perfect. Read my mind. I was going to go there. All right. So before we leave technical land here and go into the humanities, it's cooling down on all these fires, which could mean good things in the Orleans. If it's cooling down, maybe they'll get some good burning out of that thing. It's still dang dried out there, right? So Crozier, barely above 20 on the RH, and got up to about 90. And then up here on our fire and mineral, the humidities are up, that's a good deal. Temperatures are not crazy, so that's good because it's been just beyond dry. If you look at Lassen Lodge, this fuel moisture of 3.8 is bone dry, and we're in the teens on humidity, 90 degrees. Like it's not great conditions to be going direct on a timber fire. So all the more power to those men and women doing that. And you can see here, Monday night, Tuesday, it's supposed to be down to almost 40, RH up to 100. This window of weather here might break this part of the fire. They might be able to go direct on all that Turner Mountain stuff, given this window. It's kind of like the next couple of days, if they can keep a hold of it the next couple of days, then they get this nice long 4 or 5 day window where they could go direct on all that Turner Mountain stuff. All right, so someone was asking about fire lines. Someone says the Texas Canyon hotshots are from the Angeles. I wonder if that's because you thought when I was talking about putting firefighters from Texas on the Klamath. I wasn't talking about Texas Canyon. I was talking about some Flatlander. Okay, Flatlander people. I'm from the mountains. We call people from the valley Flatlanders. Now I've lived in the valley for over 30 years, so I'm like full on Flatlander now. All right, what are we doing? Let's look at some moving pictures. Okay. Before we jump to the Dozer line segment, I just wanted to play, this is from the Cave RX. This is a CAL FIRE burn that happened last fall, right below Cohasset. I'm not sure why it's so jerkety, but this fire actually, this day, they stopped firing because it was too moist. I think I need to close some windows here. All right. So a huge amount of work, CEQA and other planning and everything went into doing a really ambitious prescribed burn in the foothills below Cohasset last fall. They planned it for like probably 5 years. And the problem was that this fire just didn't care that there was a fuel break there. And it just points to kind of some of the limitations of our traditional way of thinking of fuels management. As Gus Boston, he kind of was the VMP, the Vegetation Management Program Coordinator for the Butte unit. So this was kind of his brainchild and baby. And they burned it really hot. They got like really good consumption. They really reduced fuels. And it was a big project by the standards of fuels projects we do. I don't have mapping of it right now, but I just wanted to show that because I think it's good for us to talk about what it takes to stop a big fire and the relative effectiveness of fuel breaks in stopping a big fire. So that's an ongoing topic here. This is just a little more kind of filler footage. This is a prescribed fire we did 2 years ago in Chico Creek Canyon below Forest Ranch, like right below Forest Ranch. And here we've got like 7 lighters. It's kind of getting late in the day and we're kind of losing our window for to get the fire to burn well. So it was time to kind of go for it with these lighters. And the idea is that by the time one strip here gets to the next strip, this strip will be kind of starting to cool off on the backside. So it's a way to put a lot of fire on the ground without like having the fire build up a huge amount of momentum. So the thing about this project is we met our objectives. We burned a lot of pine needles. We burned up some of this stuff on the ground. And as far as I know, this entire stand of timber completely incinerated in the park fire. Like I haven't been up to see it yet, but I'm pretty sure that like every tree out here is dead. And you know, this was like a 25-acre burn. It's not like by any means like huge, but the fire was able to build up this huge head of steam before it got here. And so when we think of like doing these fuel treatments, like it seems clear that like 20 acres isn't enough, 50 acres isn't enough. That cave burn was like a couple 100 acres or more. We have to start thinking about like treating the whole landscape or treating, you know, thousands of acres. Because if you can reduce all these surface fuels and a fire can still come through and jump through the canopy because it built up a huge head of steam downhill, like that pushes some of our kind of understanding of what we think fuels treatments, how they work, you know. But what we found is that a lot of these fuels treatments, they just don't work under extreme conditions. In this case, there's too many trees. That's one of the problems, is that like we probably should have followed up this treatment with like logging half these trees out of here. But that's difficult too because they're not worth a lot of money, and it costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of energy and effort to like cut down and move a tree, even a tree that's not like very large. These are students from Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve, so they were out getting training. I was training this gal, Olivia Weinman, on monitoring fire effects. So here she's taking the wind to get an idea of like if the fire was actually kind of creating its own wind. Okay, jumping around. Mattia, Chico guy here, is talking about using hell torches for prescribed burns, firing ops. All right. 5 years to plan. Yeah, so CEQA is like the NEPA. We talked about NEPA and how it's a bad deal for getting work done on the Forest Service land. CEQA is kind of like California's version of NEPA, where if you get state money to do anything that has an environmental impact, you have to do a thorough kind of environmental review. And that involves archaeology surveys and rare plant surveys, and whatever, depending on where you live, it can involve a lot of ologists crawling around. Conversely, during a wildfire, there's no environmental regulation whatsoever. So I just want to show some footage of dozer lines, because if we look at the map of the park fire, we got a couple of things here. We got Dixie Fire. We got too much data, that's what we got. But let's look at park fire. All right, so here are dozer lines from this fire in black. Let's make them something a little more obvious. Make them pink. All right, so that's all the dozer lines from this fire that we know of, but there's all dozers move faster than mapping crews. Actually, here this is more current. So that's everywhere that dozers have driven for park. And then let me bring up Dixie. Make the Dixie dozer lines. Let's make them yellow. Green. They're green. All right, so Dixie Fire had 2,000 miles of dozer line. Now, if we want to talk about like how effective those dozer lines were or weren't in containing the Dixie Fire, here's the Dixie Fire perimeter. All right, so 2,000 miles of dozer line, and anytime you see a dozer line inside the fire, that tells you that it didn't work, right? Obviously. So 2,000 miles of dozer line, and then there's some places that dozer line stopped the fire. I mean, quite a lot of them. But like a lot of this, the fire went out because it rained or whatever. But anyway, so I just want to talk a little about dozer lines. I'm not going to take a big stand one way or another. I'm just pointing out what I like. Okay, here's what I like about maps is like data doesn't really care about my opinion, right? This is just the way things are, right? Like I didn't make up these lines. I'm just showing you guys them, and you can kind of make your own interpretation about any of this stuff. But I like to show data to kind of frame a conversation in reality, right? We can always like say, this should have happened or that should have happened, but this like, okay, well, this is what actually happened, right? We pushed 2,000 miles of dozer line during Dixie. A whole lot of it didn't stop the fire. We pushed a whole lot of dozer line during the park fire, and like it's been helpful, right? Dozer line saved Cohasset, the parts that didn't burn. Just pull up my fill here so we can see this fire itself. All right. So what we see here is that there's a lot more dozer line around the edge of the fire, not a lot on the inside of the park. That tells another story, that this fire moved too fast for the dozers to get there, right? Fire was up and out and through Issue Wilderness before the forest supervisor even had time to like think about whether or not he wanted to authorize dozer use in the wilderness. There's Issue Wilderness. Yeah, so if anyone says like, oh, the fire got big because they wouldn't let anyone use a dozer in the Issue Wilderness, it's like, well, no, that's probably not what happened. It got big because it takes like a day to get a dozer in there. Anyway, flat ground, dozers push all over the place, and then if the fire kind of is cooperating when it gets to your dozer line, you pick it up. And if it's not, then your dozer line ends up inside the fire. But I just want to show some video of dozer lines from Dixie, just to kind of like give you an idea of like what's a dozer line, like what's it look like in the forest. So this is a dozer line kind of near Carter Creek, which is between Deer Creek and Butte Mountain. And the fire, I don't think the fire actually even got to this dozer line. So oftentimes, you know, the fire gets rained on, or they pick it up on a road or something else. But this could give you kind of just a sense of scale of like that involves like the dozers can just push trees over. And so so there's still a lot of stuff like this in the woods post Dixie, and one of the problems is that like if all this stuff gets pushed into the woods and the fire's behind us, the next fire, if we're going to use this same dozer line, now we got all this wood stuffed on the opposite side of the fire line from the previous fire, which is now where the fire is actually coming from. Sometimes the dozers go through meadows. This is Child's Meadows, and the dozer went through this meadow, and it kind of made a mess. But during the time that these dozers were going hog wild, they managed to stop the fire from getting across and becoming established in so this dozer line we're talking about right here is out in here in Child's Meadows, up here out in this area. So they were working hard to keep the fire from going in here, because the fear was during Dixie that if the fire got out in here, it could run down and burn up the front country. So good thing we kept that from happening. Man, yep. And that happens sometimes. You put out a fire, and in the same year, a fire comes and burns the next place over. Anyway, this was a mess. So the Forest Service spent a ton of energy and money, and CAL FIRE too, like coming out here with excavators and small equipment and rolling all this sod back into these gashes, and oftentimes that works pretty well. And I was joking with a friend who works for CAL FIRE, like, hey, did you guys go out and unroll all the sod that got re-rolled? And he's like, yeah, pretty much. So if you look at Child's Meadow here and the stump fire, looks like they didn't roll that particular sod back. That was here. But they rolled some new sod. All right. This is some more sod rolling and kind of meadow mess making in Carter Creek Meadow, which is in Upper Deer Creek. And fire didn't quite get here either. But oftentimes these meadows, they're wetter than they look, and so you start across it. And a lot of the operators who run these dozers aren't from these areas, and they think that this is just like, they're used to running a dozer in like the foothills where there's no meadow. It's just dirt, and you peel off the grass and it's fine. But these guys, they messed up a lot of meadows. So after the fire's over, then a lot of the same people who got paid to put the dozer lines in spend weeks or months or even like into the next year pulling all the logs that they pushed over back on across this dozer line and kind of calling it rehab. In this case, they didn't want this to become a new road or place for people to run their UTVs. But then they had to reopen this during this fire. So 3 years later, they have to go back and they have to undo all this work. So there's some conversation about like, hey, why do we rehab these dozer lines? Like, literally spending millions of dollars to kind of try to naturalize this new gash through the forest, when potentially we could use this for prescribed burning, or we could use it for the next fire. So I think we might see more action where we manage fuels along these kind of potential suppression corridors and don't spend so much time and energy like rehabbing. Because before you rehab it, it kind of looks like this. You know, the dozers came through and they just pushed over all these trees and they pushed them to the side of the dozer line away from where the fire is going. And so it's a mess. But I'm just kind of showing you this to give you an idea of like what firefighting really entails, right? Like dozer lines through forest, they look like this. And one of the reasons that so many of these dozer lines in Dixie did not hold is that, we've talked about this quite a bit, is that if you have a line that looks like that one we just looked at, unless you can kind of light a backfire off of it, people don't like the word back. People in fire don't like backfire. They like to say firing operation, tactical firing. But I use backfire kind of casually. It's like, you know, if you have a fire line that's up here south of Greenville, they put in all this dozer line as the fire was moving up towards Greenville, and there were some places they had plans to fire off of that line. But basically, unless you can like go out a week ahead of the fire and put in the line and cut down all the snags and then actually start lighting it at night and add depth to it before the fire gets there, it's extremely unlikely to hold, especially on a day where the fire's running like 10 miles. You need to have a really big, wide catcher's mitt, basically. And we see that in action over here on this fire. Like, as the fire built up its head of steam here, they already had all this dozer line prepped, and they started lighting all this stuff. So if we look at like on the park, if we look at like the 7th, let's look at the 6th. So the fire made its big run here on the 6th, and it kind of slopped over some dozer lines that were established. And then on the 7th, they started a big firing operation. Where they lit all along the edge of these dozer lines and lit enough to get some depth on it. So that way when the fire did come up out of here, it stopped on this flank. This firing operation here, they didn't have enough time to get it deep enough, so the fire boiled up out of here and slopped over. But you see, like here on the night of the 6th, they started a firing operation. So the whole thing about dozer lines is unless you can fire them, it's really difficult for them to hold. But it's another one of those things where the fire team is like, hey, we had to try something. And so we show up with a ton of dozers, and it's kind of initial attack. Initial attack is what we call it when you first get on a fire, all your dozers come out and you start pushing all around the fire, and you go as direct as possible as you can, meaning the dozers are often driving like right on the edge of the fire or in the fire. And they're super effective for doing that if the conditions are right. But once the fire gets big and you start pushing dozer line all over the place, unless you've got a tactical plan, if you're not going direct with your dozer line, where you're actually pushing dirt right up next to the fire and creating a fire line right next to the fire, if you're not going direct with a dozer, unless you're going to fire it or have a chance to get fire on it before the fire gets there, it's really very unlikely to hold up. So this is kind of a cultural thing with CAL FIRE versus the Forest Service. CAL FIRE rolls with more dozers, and CAL FIRE tends to stay in an initial attack mode longer. Where the Forest Service, if they don't pick up the fire in the first 3 or 4 days, they're like, okay, we're going to draw our big box plan, and we're going to plan out a 10-day operation where we're going to send crews out. Fire's out here. We're going to send crews out, and we're going to prep this road for 6 days, and then we're going to fire for 4 because we think we have 10 days before the fire gets there. Yeah, so someone over here saying there's a lot of nuance to it, and it's like, yep, there is. But there's some, we want to talk about lessons learned too, and some of the lessons learned during Dixie are that, like if you look at the IAP for this fire that we got going on right now, and some of these divisions, like Tehama uniform right now, where the fire is kind of moving up out of, let's see, uniform. These are all the resources that are in Tehama uniform, and Tehama uniform is, I gotta find a map here. Need some like hold music and pretty pictures for you guys to look at. So here's I'm pulling up today's fire map and operations map. So I think Park Fire will make third largest. I think the Park Fire might be done. I don't want to jinx it, but with this cool weather coming, if they can kind of get a break and get their direct line in over the next 5 days and hold it, there's not a lot of open line left on the fire. So yeah, I don't want to jinx it. I don't know how much bigger it has to be the largest. I think this whole thing though about like largest fire, biggest acres, it's kind of, to me, it's kind of pointless because like, okay, I burn like 320,000 acres of grass, and big deal, like it's a big grass fire, and then it burns some timber. But I'm not crazy about like biggest doesn't make it the worst or the best or anything. It just means that it covered a lot of ground. Okay, so here we got Division Tehama uniform, or Tango uniform, which is kind of from Ponderosa Way up to the Turner Mountain Loop Road. And this is kind of where we still got this open line here we talked about, and the fire kind of slopped over the Turner Mountain Road. But this, the IAP here, Incident Action Plan for today, it lists all the resources that they've got out there. And so they've got 3 pages of resources. This first page they got 160 people on the first page. So they've got strike team of Charlies, which is, sorry, no map. Man, you guys are gonna fire me. Okay. Fires up to Mineral up here. Here's Tango uniform. It goes from down around Ponderosa Way up to Turner Mountain Loop. And this is mainly secured here. And then so they've got like a few miles of line here. And then they got, like, dozers have been busy. That's kind of, this is part of my point here. But also just, okay, on this division they've got some strike teams of Type 3 engines. So strike team of Charlies is Type 3, meaning kind of wildland engines. They've got a task force of OES engines. Those are the yellow ones, which are 3 types 3s and 2 type 6s. So 5, 10, 15, 20 engines, 21, 22. Then they've got 10 small engines, 32 engines. Then they've got a task force, which is a bunch of equipment. They got 2 groups of prison crews. They've got a hotshot crew, another hotshot crew, another hotshot crew. Strike team leader, and then I've got a dozer here. And then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12 dozers, and you've got a bunch of water tenders, and then you've got some more water tenders, and you've got 3 heavy equipment bosses. So those guys are supposed to kind of keep the dozers out of trouble. 3 dozer bosses, 12 dozers, and then a couple miles of line. So the dozers, the private dozers especially, like, they just want to work. They're getting paid. They get paid whether they work or not, but they want to work. And you've got 3 guys to watch 12 people with heavy equipment. So during Dixie, they had sometimes they'd have 5 or maybe 10 heavy equipment bosses, but they had 200 dozers. So you have a lot of unsupervised folks who, a lot of them have not a lot of fire experience, out here pushing, and sometimes they'll just tell them, just push, just go push. If you're not pushing, I'm not paying, right? So that's just one division, right? That's one division out of all these divisions. So a lot of pushing happens, and not all of it is tactically useful. Now, if the fire happens to arrive at a ridge where there's a dozer line and it lays down and the weather's good, then you're glad it's there. But talking to a buddy of mine who's a veteran kind of agency dozer operator, he said that it's hard for the contractors to find operators who are willing to take the risk and the hours and everything else. And so he said they're just looking for meat in the seat, which I thought, meat in the seat. I hadn't heard that before. This person says, makes me want to buy a dozer. Do they take any size? I think they like D4s and bigger. But yeah, if you got a use for it, and if you have a couple slow years, then you can sell it to someone else who... it's a business that's good if you already have a use for a dozer, because otherwise it might sit a lot. But you can make good money with your dozer. Just, you need some meat in the seat. That's all you need. Meat in the seat, dozer. You need a service rig, which you can write off. So, I mean, it's a pretty good deal. You get to buy lots of stuff, big trucks and stuff. I mean, yeah. And, out of work loggers, it's a whole thing. Like, there's a lot going on there. Anyway, yeah, some dozer transports got burned up on this fire. I'm not trying to trash talk anything. I'm just talking about my experience, and that my experience is that there's a lot of unsupervised dirt moving that goes on during a fire like this. Yeah, Wildfire 371 says, don't jinx it. It's got to hold through the fall winds. I make the mistake of getting predictive on here, and then it's not a good idea. But so far so good. Handlines are constructed by people with axes or Pulaskis, and it's kind of like building a trail, chugging along. I think we're not going to talk about. I don't have any good video of that right yet. Oh no, man! I think that I don't have my watch on, but I think our hour's up, people. Lots of good questions, so I can't answer them all. But big money, and I got one last thing I wanted to talk about while we're arm waving here, and that is this fire's costing hundreds of millions of dollars, literally. And there's just that extreme expense of when you see this OES strike team, each of these strike teams, but especially when you start having strike teams of alphas, which are the big urban engines. I saw when I went up Highway 32, there was a strike team from LA City, and that's 5 engines with like I think 3 people per engine, and then like a strike team leader. Those things cost like 40 grand a day or more. Like I heard like 15 years ago it was like 35,000 a day. So it might be like to 50,000 a day now. So that's basically paying $10,000 a day per engine, because you're paying for the engine, and then you're paying the overtime of a really well-paid urban firefighter, and you're paying the overtime of the person that is filling in their shift, because city fire departments are staffed at a level that has a full schedule basically, and then if anyone wants to go do something else, you have to pay overtime for someone to come in who's already working a full schedule. So that's kind of how it works. So when you look at like, okay, there's 160 people on this page of this division, and then there's another 30, and so 200 people on this one division of the fire, and all those people are making at least $1,000 a day, I would guess, or it's costing us that much to have them out there. So it's $200,000 just for one division. So that's how these fires get really expensive. And then when you look at kind of what is being protected here, like all the energy that went into like protecting this 20,000 acres of timberland, and the Type 1 helicopters that are like running laps. So we've talked a lot about this tension between direct firefighting and indirect firefighting, and indirect can be cheaper. You build one fire line and you burn off of it, and then if it works, you're done. Versus going direct and like needing to run like a week of heavy helicopters on this one flank to keep it from keeping on chewing through these clear cuts, and dozens of VLAT drops, large air tankers that are dropping like $80,000 to $100,000 per drop of VLATs, and that's all being borne by the taxpayer to save these timber plantations that are kind of by their nature not fire resilient, that are highly flammable, filled with dense small trees. And so in Oregon and Washington, the timber landowners pay for firefighting, and in California they don't. So I think that's an interesting topic. Basically, is like, okay, so if we subsidize firefighting to protect private timberlands that are not fire resilient, it's an externalized cost for the timber operator. They don't have to pay for this firefighting. They have to pay losses if they burn it up, and they are paying to, clear cut or to do fuels treatment. But I just have wondered over time, would they be more motivated to practice more fire resilient forestry if they had to pay for the dozers, if they had to pay for the air tankers, if they had to pay for the helicopters that are and if they had to take on the risk themselves of like putting people out here in harm's way, trying to stop an outrageous kind of nuke bomb fire from moving on to their land. This fire sent a dozer operator or someone to the hospital with burn injuries because they were out in front of this fire when it boiled out, and they were out there because obviously we don't want to burn up our forests, we don't want to burn up our watersheds, everything else, but the amount of political pressure that is applied to minimize acres burned in these highly flammable industrial timberlands is it's worthy of a good conversation, I'd say. Someone says socialism for the ruling class. Yeah, and the fuels treatments, it's true. They are often funded by grants. How much land did private landowners lose like SPI? Well, good question. Let's look at here real quick. These yellow areas are private timberlands. So let's just kind of start up here. Just kind of looking at areas that have clear cuts. Okay, 15,000 acres burned on that side. Kind of had a whoop-de-doo up there. All right, well, like 20,000 acres have been saved so far. And then, okay. And then SPI lost some land over here. They lost quite a lot down here in the front country, like, or in Chico Creek. So some of the stuff didn't burn that intensely. The stuff down here did. Yeah, so SPI lost maybe 20,000 acres there. So SPI has lost like 35,000 acres of 35,000 acres of land, and like a really lowball estimate of replanting is like $1,000 an acre. That's not including like site prep and everything. So $35 million just to replant. So I'm curious in some of this ground if they will replant. We've seen the SPI bail out of Concal. So like down here in Concal. This land out here was SPI, checkerboard kind of with BLM. And it burned in 2008 and they replanted, and then it burned in 2018 and they lost what they'd replanted, and they'd already kind of planted before 2008. So there's some places that if they replanted here, they're going to replant third time in like 15 years. So SPI bailed out of Concal. They realized they couldn't count on, because Concal has had so much fire between the 2008 lightning complex and the Camp Fire and the Concal fire of 2000. They bailed. They're like, hey, we'll never be able to grow a 60-year rotation here because we're going to have fires, bad fires every 10 to 20 years. So I'm kind of curious how that lesson is playing out across the landscape. SPI has land in Washington, and they don't have to. There's places they will likely walk away from, and you could see that potentially some of this land out here around the edge of the Ishii Wilderness. It's a high-risk place to try to grow trees for 80 years if you're going to have fires. Like we've seen here in Ishii, there's places here that have had like 7 fires in the last 100 years. So trying to grow a 80-year crop on the edge. So I think that one interesting thing about all that is that there might be opportunities here for conservation groups. This is super important deer range. The Tehama deer herd. And so it's like, well, maybe the California Deer Association, maybe the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, maybe the California Turkey Foundation, maybe some of those groups, there's like the Tehama Wildlife Area out here. This is all a state game refuge. Like there's potentially land that got burnt in this fire that is going to be for sale, that could be bought at a good price and managed with fire for habitat. So I think that's one of those interesting things. The market's going to change. Timber companies are going to bail out of the places that they keep taking losses and that they can't see a way forward. And maybe some good things will come out of that. Maybe it'll go to land ownership where the mission of the landowner is to actually maintain habitat and grow wildlife and grow oaks, and we could actually burn. So big picture kind of convo to have about all that. What happens in the watersheds if SPI bails? I don't know. Nature has been managing this landscape for a lot longer than SPI though, and yep. And fire's been managing this landscape as long as nature's been managing it. So one thing it would mean is that you're not going to have this landscape soaked in herbicide for the next 10 years to keep brush from growing so trees can grow. All right. And if you work for SPI and want to come on and talk on the lookout about any of this stuff, or if you work for Collins Pine, or if you work for CAL FIRE, call me up. I'd love to talk to you. We've got a whole bunch of interviews on our website. You can check them out. We want to be kind of solutions oriented here. We don't want to just point fingers and say bad things about people. But yeah, check out some of our interviews. We like talking to people. Got the Will Harling interview. We got Wolfie Rugel, Jim Klump. Jim Klump one is really amazing. Daniel Swain, Eric and Yana came and talked about their research on structure losses in the Dixie Fire. And our conversation with Sue Husari too, I highly recommend. Sue is one of the, she's a real leader in fire, both of the Forest Service and Park Service, and smart lady. So check that stuff out. And if you got good stories and want to talk, hit me up, because we're all about kind of culture and storytelling, whatever else. And while you're there, become a member, become a supporter. I'll keep it going.